for all intents and purposes, thematically, lyrically, even down to the album title and a lot of the symbolism and the imagery that with the whole thing was very much closing a chapter for you in your life and in your career and for the band, kind of revisiting some of the threads of some of the stories from earlier records, but also putting what at the time I think could easily have been interpreted as a very definitive endpoint, regardless of what was going to come next.
Well, I mean, it was never talked about, but it was as close to the idea that I wouldn't say it was never talked about. It was never decided, but I certainly felt like it had the opportunity or the chance to be the final record from the band. It was written with that in mind to a certain degree. The last song on the record is essentially my goodbye to this thing that I created when I was 16 years old. And it's still to this day a hard song to listen to for me because, I mean, I remember the first time I played it for my parents, I cried, even though I fucking tracked it and had sang it. And we were sitting in the car and I was playing it and I like got emotional just because it broke my heart. The whole concept and the whole idea of it ending broke my heart. But there was an element that we couldn't move past. And if we couldn't get past that, then it had to end because we couldn't be that anymore. And it was heartbreaking and it felt terrible, but I just didn't know another way to do it. And so it felt like it was the end. There's so many songs on that record. And, there's also songs that are very personal to me. That was when I was really committed and to being sober and not drinking at all. And I was in a very delicate place in my life. Songs like When They Call My Name, it's literally just about, my relationship with Juliet and needing to have that person that you can talk to about these things and the demons that were constantly coming out of me and the feeling of like, my God, I've spent the last half a decade drunk. And what kind of situations did I get myself into? And what kind of things did I say or do that, you're trying to remember all these things that you can't because you had poisoned yourself into not being there anymore. So it's a very scary time. And so that's what that song's about. But a primary function of the record was the catharsis of saying goodbye to this element. And also the way that I was able to do that was to also end the storyline that had started on Wretched and Divine. And so while it was never publicly known by the audience that this was the last record, it also just was the last record in the sense that, Jake recorded his guitar parts in his studio. Jinx recorded his stuff in his studio. I recorded my vocals in Feldy's studio. CeCe recorded his drums in Feldy's studio, but none of us were ever in the same room. Maybe more than 2 days, and, it was, you would get the song done. And it wasn't because we hated one another. It was just that the band had become so disjointed and there just wasn't a connection there that we were just getting it done, and the songs would be there and then the idea would come up and then, but it was never done in a way of like, everybody's in a room and we're collaborating. It was the exact opposite of Wretched and Divine. And it's very hard to make a concept record, but not everyone's in on the concept or not everyone's there for all those things. The reason that Wretched and Divine works is because it was such a collaborative effort and there was so much about it that was a collaboration. But again, the breaks that I had taken from the band and the fact that the Andy Black situation being what it was, it just felt like maybe this is the only way forward. And if that's the case, then we have to go out with a great send off. And, that was the plan. I remember coming up with ways that I could say things that, would indicate stories or experiences I was having and things I couldn't talk about, and so that for me was an important record, but it was also a very, while if the Shadow Side is me coming out of drinking and getting happy, Vale is me going through that second wave of emotion of, well, now that I've gotten out of that, what do I do now? Where's my life go now? Am I going to lose this thing that has been the most important part of my professional life? And on an emotional level, one of the most important things in my life since I was a literal teenage boy, you know. And so it was just a very dark time. And so I was very proud of the record. I still am. I know it's not everybody's favorite record. It's one that is very divisive with our fans. Some people love it. Some people absolutely can't stand it. Like most of our records, it did about 50% good, 50% bad with the critics. That's kind of the way that our records tend to go anyway. I was surprised at how many people talked about how commercial it was. But I guess in some ways, a lot of that also comes down to the fact that it's a little bit more of a, and not, people aren't wrong when they say this, it's more of an Andy Black Veil Brides record, because that's kind of where I was at emotionally and as a songwriter at the time. And so, yeah, I mean, there's not much to say about the studio experience because there wasn't really a studio experience.
Yeah. Well, you know what I think a great analogy is for that record is like the season finale of a show that could be the series finale, when like
Right.
the creative team doesn't know whether or not they're getting renewed. So they make the season finale as though, well, if this is the last episode ever, we feel good about it.
Right.
But we hope there's another season. And then, thankfully for all of us, Black Veil Brides was renewed for further seasons.
Yeah.
But that could have, had that been the send off, it could have stood as, a proper ending to the whole thing.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can do 2.5 more records. I think we can. Ghost of Ohio was another opportunity in some respects to do something conceptual and thematic, and to put your name on a graphic novel for the first time, which is there were a lot of firsts happening for you in that era. Let's talk about Ghost of Ohio a little bit, and also there were, in terms of broadening your horizons, I would say even more influences and different shades and colors creatively than even the first solo record, let alone the Black Veil stuff.
Well, I would say also that an important part of the Ghost of Ohio is that the Black Veil tour cycle for Vale lasted about 6 months.
Yeah.
And not a lot of shows within that 6 months. There was some stuff that had happened where I just was done. I couldn't. I was touring in a separate band, or I was touring in a separate bus from the band, and I would only really see them when I went on stage. I just felt like what everything that I had dreamt the band to be had been distorted, and it just didn't feel like it was fun anymore. And sometimes fun isn't your job, but if you can find a way to make something fun, that's obviously more preferable. So I thought, well, we did those Roxy shows, and there was some, again, I can't get into it too much, but there was an element that just didn't really mesh anymore. And it just felt like, well, I'm just going to go do an Andy Black record and just move on, because I have to tour to make a living. I have to do this. So I'll just go back to that. And, that was the initial thought, as well, as do another one of those, right? Because I have to make a living. I have to do this, and I want to be creative. So I'll just do that. That was the basis. And there was almost no motivation at the beginning of the record to do anything. I would go into Feldy's studio and we'd write something, and I'd go, okay, fine, it's not blowing me away. And then one of the days came along where we started to work on a song, and the phrase "the Ghost of Ohio" came up. And because for years, I wrote a song years ago with some friends that was the King of Yesterday. I've always loved the concept of, there's a certain personality type, especially within our field of the world, that is obsessed with nostalgia and romanticizing the past. And I think to a certain degree, at different phases of my life, I've remembered situations or romanticized them in a way that wasn't how they really were, or people or friends or whatever it is. And so I always love that situation or that idea for a song of like this person who's obsessed with the things that have faded away, and be able to reevaluate those situations with your own narrative that you're writing onto it. And so that was kind of the basis for the idea. And then it became, well, what if this is actually a character that just goes around where they used to live and doesn't have any connection with anybody, but just remembers the great times, even though there weren't any? You know what I mean? Just making up a version of events where everything's great and everything's fine. And that was the basis. So we did a song, Ghost of Ohio, which was initially just a piano and vocal ballad and didn't really go anywhere. It was, the lyrics were great in my opinion, and the idea was great, but the song didn't go anywhere. And I remember, you know, playing it for Juliet and other people, and when I would listen to it, I'd just be like, this is not really, it's not enough, right? But the idea was there, and then all of a sudden, we're sitting around for a while, a couple months pass, we're trying to figure out what we're going to do. What's this record going to be? More time goes by, writing more songs. And one day we had moved and I was sitting in our new place, and I all of a sudden just had this idea of, well, what if the Ghost of Ohio was a character and this record is a story, and similar to Wretched and Divine? So I just started writing it, and I wrote the whole story of who this character is. You know, we were working on the book a lot of the time, so I had a lot of ideas about my childhood and growing up in Cincinnati, and ideas about that part of the world.
And we were delving into a lot of the sort of unknown, creepy shadow side underbelly of Ohio, that there is, you know,
right.
you don't think of Ohio as a gothic, spooky place, but there are actually, in fact, as people will read in the book, a lot of cool, crazy, creepy, supernatural-ish stories.
Yeah, and places that I spent the bulk of my childhood. Most of which show up in the Ghost of Ohio video that Pat and I did, where we went to those places and filmed them. But yeah, so I took, you know, like the shelves in a closet that are like wood pieces that slide into place and they like stack up. I pulled one of those out of the closet up here, and I grabbed a bunch of paint and I painted this big white wood piece with this character, because I don't know why, but I was like, oh, I need to paint it. So I painted this green-faced monster character who had an eye patch, and instead of a missing eye, he had an eye patch. And I just took a picture of it and I sent it to Feldy and Blasco and everybody and said, this is the record. This is what we're doing. Let's scrap everything that we've got and start over. And so that's what we did. And then it became the race to try to make that record be that story and get that done. At the same time, I got hit up by a mutual friend of ours, Josh Bernstein, who said, hey, I'm working with this company. Would you ever think about doing a comic book? And this is literally like a day after I wrote the treatment for Ghost of Ohio. And I said, actually, yesterday I wrote a treatment for a comic book. Let's do this. So then within a day of that, I'm on a call with an artist and the publishers and everything else. So that it went from apathy about just making a record so that I could stay alive kind of thing to full on excitement about making this record about this story and all that kind of stuff. And then, you know, putting it out. And then the truth of the matter is that tour cycle was one where by the summer of last year, by like June of last year, I was really angry that I had let something take away this band, that I had allowed something to get in the way and make it more difficult and make it impossible to continue. And while I understood that it would be very difficult to change that, and I knew that there was a nearly impossible uphill climb to get the things changed that we needed to get changed, I was dedicated to the idea that that's what I was going to do. Rather than ending the band, it was to fix this problem. And so I called up the guys and I said, look, I want to fix this. Like I want to do what we should do, and it's time. And I know it's going to be hard, and I know it's going to be a long and difficult and an arduous process, but we've got to do what we have to do. And so we just started talking every day. You know, while I was on that tour, I'd be texting ideas. We decided, hey, you know what? We've been floating around this idea of this 10-year anniversary re-recording for a number of years. Let's just really commit. Let's really do it. You know, let's get it done. Let's have Jake produce it, you know. And then also on that tour, I started to get to know Lonnie, and Lonnie seemed like this wonderful person. So it's just all that stuff kind of coalesced into where it ended up. But I can remember being in, I think it was Atlantic City Warped Tour. You're on the beach, tons of people. And and I don't mean to say this to sound like, woe is me, I get to play in front of a bunch of people, but I had a sense of just apathy to the whole thing. Because as that tour went on, I more and more wanted my solo band to be like a rock band. I wanted to play rock music on stage
Right.
again. And I was upset that this band that I created when I was very young was no longer my means of doing that, or seemed like it wasn't going to be moving forward. And I just didn't want to accept that. And so I can remember before that show, I was telling Juliet, like, I'm not feeling this anymore. I'm not feeling just my initials being on the stage. You know what I mean? Like I want to be part of a band. And so that became the catalyst for like, let's do this. And then we got together, and obviously we were in the position we're in now, and we put together Restitch These Wounds, and now we're working on a new record, and the band's in the best place we've ever been in. And yeah, but Ghost of Ohio is important for a couple of reasons. One, because it's a record that I love. I got to make songs that sounded like Bruce Springsteen and all the influences that I have. It was my final record with Universal, so I was able to get out of that deal and do so on good terms, and not mad at anybody or anything, be able to just move on. And it was my first opportunity to make a comic book and to make a story come to life that way, in my own way, about emotions and about concepts and ideas that I had felt my whole life, but was never able to really say through music.
Yeah, and to go to San Diego Comic-Con to promote your comic book.
Yeah, I got to do a signing at San Diego Comic-Con. I got to do a panel at New York Comic-Con. Like, my first time at either of those events, and I got to be part of it in that way.
That's a great way to go for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a, I mean, like everything else in your life, as a contributor to the things you love, a participant, not just an audience member or observer, which I think speaks a lot to the arc of your career as it's continued.